Transparency is the foundation of accountability. In this segment, you will see unfiltered and unedited reality. We are presenting raw, primary footage directly from the front lines of justice, offering you an objective window into the complexities of the law.
Stop, don't move. Hands where I can see them.
Officer, what's going on?
Drop the briefcase, turn around, face the wall.
There's a misunderstanding. I work here. I'm with the Department of Justice.
Save it, do it now.
The elevator doors slid open on the 14th floor, and John Washington stepped out with his briefcase in one hand and his Department of Justice identification badge clearly visible on his suit jacket. He had worked late again, reviewing case files for a federal investigation that would determine the fate of 3 major corporations. It was nearly 10:30 on a Tuesday night, and the office building was mostly empty, except for security guards and a few dedicated lawyers burning the midnight oil. John had been working at the DOJ for 6 years, specializing in white-collar crime and corporate fraud. He was respected by his colleagues, feared by defense attorneys, and had just been promoted to senior counsel. Tonight, he was heading to his car after another 16-hour day, looking forward to getting home to his wife and 2 young daughters, who were probably already asleep. What John didn't know was that rookie police officer Danny Walker had been called to this exact building just 20 minutes earlier. Walker had graduated from the police academy 8 weeks ago, and this was only his 3rd week working solo patrol. He was eager to prove himself, maybe a little too eager, and when the dispatch came in about a possible break-in at the Meridian Tower, he responded immediately. The call had come from an overzealous security guard who claimed he saw someone suspicious on the 14th floor through the building's camera system. The guard, who was new himself and working his first night shift alone, had noticed a black man in a suit moving through the hallways after business hours. Rather than checking the building's access logs or calling upstairs to verify, he decided to call the police. Officer Walker arrived at the building with his training fresh in his mind and his adrenaline pumping. He had been taught to assess threats quickly, take control of situations, and never let his guard down. Unfortunately, he had not been taught much about implicit bias, de-escalation techniques, or the importance of gathering all the facts before acting. The security guard met Walker in the lobby and explained his concerns. He pointed to the monitor showing the 14th floor and described the suspicious individual he had observed. Walker nodded seriously, his hand instinctively moving toward his service weapon as he prepared to investigate what he assumed was a potential burglary in progress. Before we continue with what happened next, let me ask you something. Have you ever been in the wrong place at the wrong time, where someone made assumptions about you based on how you looked rather than who you actually were? Drop a comment below and let me know where you're watching from today. And if you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button because this story takes some incredible turns that you absolutely won't want to miss. John was waiting for the elevator when he heard footsteps approaching rapidly from behind. He turned around to see a young police officer walking toward him with obvious urgency. The officer's hand was resting on his duty belt, and his expression was tense and focused. Officer Walker had taken the stairs to avoid alerting the suspect to his presence. His training had taught him to approach potential criminals with caution and maintain the element of surprise. When he reached the 14th floor and saw John standing by the elevator, everything seemed to confirm what he had been told by the security guard. Here was a black man in business attire on a floor where he allegedly didn't belong, late at night when the building should be empty. Walker's rookie instincts kicked in, and he made a decision that would change both of their lives forever. Walker called out in a loud, authoritative voice, commanding John to stop where he was and put his hands where he could see them. John, who had been checking his phone while waiting for the elevator, looked up in complete confusion. He saw the young officer approaching with his hand near his weapon and immediately understood that something was very wrong. John raised his hand slowly, his briefcase still in his right hand, and asked the officer what the problem was. His voice was calm and professional, the same tone he used in federal courtrooms when addressing judges and juries. He had been through situations like this before, unfortunately, and he knew the importance of staying composed. Officer Walker ordered John to drop the briefcase and turn around facing the wall. John complied, setting his briefcase down gently and placing his palms against the wall. He told the officer that there seemed to be some kind of misunderstanding and that he was a federal attorney who worked in this building. Walker wasn't listening. His training had taught him that suspects often lie and create elaborate stories to avoid arrest. He had been told to secure the scene first and ask questions later. He approached John from behind and began to pat him down for weapons, his hands moving professionally but roughly across John's expensive suit. During the search, Walker felt the outline of John's wallet and immediately removed it. He also noticed the DOJ identification badge clipped to John's jacket, but in his heightened state of alertness, he didn't take the time to read it carefully. Instead, he assumed it might be fake or stolen, another prop in what he believed was an elaborate deception. John remained calm throughout the search, though inside he was growing increasingly frustrated and concerned. He explained again that he was a Department of Justice attorney, that he had every right to be in this building, and that his identification would prove everything he was saying. Officer Walker opened John's wallet and found his driver's license, credit cards, and his official DOJ credentials. But instead of examining them carefully, he quickly closed the wallet and placed it on the ground next to the briefcase. He was operating on pure adrenaline now, convinced that he had caught a burglar in the act. The situation escalated when Walker decided to place John in handcuffs. He pulled John's hands behind his back and clicked the metal restraints into place, ignoring John's continued protests and explanations. John asked repeatedly what crime he was being accused of committing, but Walker remained focused on securing what he believed was a dangerous suspect. This is when things got even worse. Walker called for backup, reporting that he had apprehended a possible burglary suspect at the Meridian Tower. He described John as uncooperative and potentially dangerous, though John had done nothing except comply with every command and attempt to explain the situation. Within minutes, 2 more police cars arrived at the building. Officers Rodriguez and Thompson, both veterans with over 10 years of experience each, rushed upstairs to assist their rookie colleague. They found Walker standing guard over John, who was still handcuffed and facing the wall. Rodriguez immediately sensed that something wasn't right about the scene. John was wearing an expensive suit, high-quality shoes, and carried himself with the bearing of a professional rather than a criminal. His briefcase was leather and looked well-maintained, not the kind of bag someone would use to carry stolen goods. Thompson noticed the DOJ identification badge on John's jacket and asked Walker if he had examined it. Walker admitted he had seen it but assumed it was fake. Thompson removed the badge from John's jacket and studied it carefully under the hallway lighting. The badge was clearly authentic, with proper security features and John's photograph prominently displayed. Thompson showed it to Rodriguez, and both veteran officers immediately realized they had a serious problem on their hands. They were looking at the identification of a senior federal attorney who had been handcuffed and detained without cause. Rodriguez asked John to state his name and position for the record. John, still facing the wall with his hands cuffed behind his back, clearly identified himself as John Washington, senior counsel with the United States Department of Justice, Criminal Division. He provided his employee identification number and the direct phone number for his supervisor. The 2 veteran officers exchanged glances that conveyed years of shared experience and mutual understanding. They both knew that rookie Walker had just made a career-ending mistake that would have consequences far beyond this hallway. Thompson immediately began uncuffing John, while Rodriguez pulled Walker aside for an urgent conversation. The rookie's face had gone pale as the reality of his mistake started to sink in. He watched as John rubbed his wrists and straightened his jacket, the DOJ badge catching the fluorescent light in the hallway. John remained composed despite everything that had just happened to him. He retrieved his briefcase and wallet, checking to make sure nothing had been damaged during the incident. Rodriguez approached him with obvious embarrassment and began what would be the first of many apologies John would receive over the next several hours. The veteran officer explained that there had been a miscommunication with building security and that the situation should never have escalated to this point. John listened politely but made it clear that this was far more serious than a simple miscommunication. He had been racially profiled, illegally detained, and treated like a criminal in his own workplace. Rodriguez asked if John wanted to file a complaint, though both men knew this was going to happen regardless of what John said in that moment. When a federal attorney gets handcuffed by police for no legitimate reason, there are procedures that automatically kick into motion. Internal affairs would be notified, reports would be filed, and investigations would begin. Officer Walker stood nearby, looking like he wanted to disappear into the wall. His training sergeant had warned the recruits about situations exactly like this one. Making assumptions based on someone's race could destroy a career faster than almost anything else. And now Walker was living proof of that lesson. John pulled out his phone and began making calls. His first call was to his supervisor at the Department of Justice, explaining what had happened and requesting that someone from the office come to the building immediately. His second call was to his wife, letting her know he would be even later getting home and that she might be hearing about this incident on the news. The building's security guard finally appeared on the 14th floor, having taken the elevator up after hearing about the police activity. When he saw John standing there with his DOJ badge visible and his professional demeanor intact, the guard's face went through the same transformation that Walker's had just experienced. Rodriguez questioned the security guard about his initial call to police. The guard admitted he had not checked the building's access logs before calling for help. If he had bothered to look, he would have seen that John had legitimate keycard access to the 14th floor and had been working late in his office for the past several hours. The guard also revealed that he had described John as suspicious, primarily because he was a black man in business attire moving through the building after hours. He had made no effort to contact John directly through the building's intercom system or to verify his identity through proper channels. John documented everything on his phone, taking pictures of his handcuff marks, recording the names and badge numbers of all officers present, and making detailed notes about the timeline of events. As a federal prosecutor, he knew the importance of preserving evidence and creating an accurate record of what had transpired. Within 30 minutes, 2 representatives from the Department of Justice arrived at the building. They were followed shortly after by a supervisor from the police department's Internal Affairs Division and a captain who had been called in specifically to handle what everyone now understood was a potential public relations nightmare. The DOJ representatives listened as John recounted the entire incident from beginning to end. They took their own photographs and requested copies of all police reports that would be generated from the encounter. They also made it clear that the Department of Justice would be conducting its own investigation into the incident. Officer Walker was immediately placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation. His supervisor explained that this was standard procedure when allegations of racial profiling were made against an officer. But Walker understood that his career was effectively over before it had really begun. The police captain tried to minimize the situation, suggesting that it was an honest mistake made by an inexperienced officer who was simply trying to do his job. John responded that honest mistakes don't typically involve handcuffing federal attorneys based solely on their race and presence in a building where they work legally every day. The building's management company was also called in to address their security procedures and training protocols. It became clear that their guards had no real understanding of how to verify tenant identity or when it was appropriate to involve law enforcement in building security matters. John finally left the building at nearly 2 in the morning, more than 3 hours after the initial encounter with Officer Walker. The media had already picked up the story through police scanner reports and sources within the department who understood the significance of what had occurred. By the time John arrived home, his wife was waiting up for him with a mixture of concern and anger. She had dealt with similar incidents throughout their marriage, but nothing quite this serious or professionally damaging. They talked until nearly 4 in the morning about what this would mean for their family and how to explain it to their daughters. The next morning, John's phone started ringing before 6 a.m. Reporters wanted statements, civil rights organizations wanted to offer support, and colleagues from the Justice Department were calling to express their outrage and solidarity. The story was already trending on social media with hashtags demanding accountability and reform. Officer Walker woke up to find his name and photographs circulating online, along with details about his brief career in law enforcement. The police union assigned him a lawyer, but privately, union representatives acknowledged that this case would be nearly impossible to defend, given the clear evidence and John's credibility as a federal prosecutor. The security guard who had made the initial call was terminated from his position before noon that same day. The building management company released a statement expressing their apologies to John and announcing immediate changes to their security protocols and training procedures. John arrived at his office to find flowers, cards, and messages of support from colleagues throughout the federal building. His supervisor called an emergency meeting to discuss how the Department of Justice would respond to the incident and what resources would be available to support John through the aftermath. The story dominated local news cycles and began gaining national attention as more details emerged. Legal experts appeared on television to discuss the implications of a federal attorney being detained by police while simply trying to go home from work. Civil rights leaders used the incident to highlight ongoing issues with racial profiling in law enforcement. Have you ever witnessed something like this happen to someone you know? Type your thoughts in the comments below, because what happens next in this story will shock you even more. Within 48 hours, John had retained one of the most prominent civil rights attorneys in the country. The lawyer had handled dozens of cases involving police misconduct and racial profiling, but he told reporters that this case was particularly egregious because of how clear-cut the evidence was and how obviously inappropriate the officer's actions had been. The civil rights attorney, Michael Davidson, had built his career on cases exactly like this one. He had seen police officers make terrible decisions based on racial bias countless times before, but the John Washington case presented unique advantages that most victims of police misconduct never had. John was not just any citizen who had been wrongfully detained. He was a senior federal prosecutor with an impeccable reputation, extensive legal knowledge, and the full backing of the Department of Justice. He had video evidence from the building's security cameras, multiple witnesses, and documentation of every aspect of the encounter. Davidson knew that police departments typically fought these cases aggressively, using every legal maneuver available to avoid admitting wrongdoing or paying significant damages. But this case would be different. The evidence was overwhelming, the victim was sympathetic and credible, and the officer's actions were so clearly inappropriate that defending them would be nearly impossible. The police department's initial response was predictably defensive. They released a statement saying that Officer Walker had been responding to a legitimate security concern and had followed proper procedures for investigating a potential crime. They emphasized his rookie status and suggested that any mistakes were the result of inexperience rather than racial bias. This strategy backfired immediately. Legal experts pointed out that inexperience was not a defense for violating someone's constitutional rights. If anything, it raised questions about the department's training programs and supervision of new officers. Civil rights organizations demanded to know why a rookie officer was working alone when he clearly lacked the judgment and experience to handle complex situations. The security footage from the building became crucial evidence in the case. Multiple cameras had captured different angles of the encounter, showing John behaving professionally and cooperatively while Officer Walker escalated the situation unnecessarily. The footage clearly showed John displaying his DOJ credentials and attempting to explain his identity, while Walker ignored these efforts and proceeded with the detention. Perhaps most damaging to Walker's defense was audio recording from his radio communications. The tapes revealed that he had described John as suspicious and potentially dangerous without any factual basis for these characterizations. His tone suggested that he had already decided John was guilty of something before gathering any real evidence. Internal affairs investigators interviewed every officer who had been present during the incident. Officer Rodriguez and Thompson both provided statements that were highly critical of Walker's handling of the situation. They described his actions as reckless and unprofessional, noting that basic investigative procedures had been completely ignored. The investigators also reviewed Walker's academy training records and found several concerning patterns. His instructors had noted that he tended to make quick judgments without gathering sufficient information. One evaluation specifically mentioned that Walker seemed to view certain types of people as inherently more suspicious than others. More troubling was the discovery that Walker had made several traffic stops during his brief career that followed similar patterns. He had pulled over a disproportionate number of Black and Hispanic drivers, often for minor infractions that other officers might have overlooked. While none of these stops had resulted in formal complaints, The pattern suggested that the incident with John was not an isolated mistake. The police union's defense strategy became increasingly desperate as more evidence emerged. They hired expensive attorneys and public relations consultants to try to control the narrative, but every attempt to justify Walker's actions only made the situation worse. Union representatives argued that officers had to make split-second decisions in dangerous situations and couldn't be expected to conduct thorough investigations before taking action. This argument fell apart when prosecutors pointed out that Walker had plenty of time to examine John's credentials and verify his identity before placing him in handcuffs. They also tried to blame the building's security guard for providing inaccurate information that led to the incident. While the guard's role was certainly problematic, legal experts noted that police officers are trained to verify information independently, rather than simply accepting unconfirmed reports from civilians. The union's most tone-deaf argument was their suggestion that Walker had actually been protecting John by detaining him, since there could have been real criminals in the building. This statement prompted widespread ridicule and demonstrated how out of touch the union leadership was with public opinion about the case. Meanwhile, John was dealing with the personal and professional aftermath of the incident. While his colleagues and supervisors were supportive, he found himself constantly reliving the experience and questioning whether he should have handled things differently. His wife and daughters were also struggling with the situation. His older daughter, who was 12, had seen news coverage of the incident and was asking difficult questions about why police officers would treat her father like a criminal. His younger daughter, who was 8, didn't fully understand what had happened but could sense the tension and stress in the household. John's work was also affected by the ongoing legal proceedings and media attention. He found it difficult to concentrate on his cases, knowing that his own case was consuming so much time and energy. His supervisor had offered to reassign his caseload to other attorneys, but John was determined to continue his work while pursuing justice for what had happened to him. The federal investigation into the incident was proceeding on multiple tracks. The FBI was conducting a civil rights investigation to determine whether Walker had violated federal laws by detaining John based on his race. The Department of Justice was also reviewing the police department's training and supervision practices to identify systemic problems that might have contributed to the incident. Public pressure was mounting for meaningful police reform in response to the case. Community organizations organized protests and rallies, demanding accountability for Officer Walker and changes to prevent similar incidents in the future. City council members faced tough questions about police oversight and training during public meetings. The mayor, who had initially tried to stay neutral on the issue, eventually felt compelled to make a public statement, acknowledging that John had been treated unfairly and promising reforms to police training and accountability measures. However, many activists viewed these promises as empty political gestures designed to calm public anger without creating real change. Officer Walker's life had been completely upended by his actions that night. He was receiving death threats and had been forced to move out of his apartment after his address was posted online. His family was also facing harassment, and his parents were struggling to understand how their son's dream of becoming a police officer had turned into such a nightmare. Walker's attorney advised him to avoid making any public statements about the case, but privately, the rookie officer was beginning to understand the magnitude of his mistake. He had joined the police force hoping to serve his community and make a positive difference, but instead, he had become a symbol of everything wrong with modern policing. The financial implications of the case were becoming clear as well. The city's insurance company was already expressing concerns about their potential liability, and budget officials were quietly preparing for a settlement that could reach into the millions of dollars. Davidson, John's attorney, was building a comprehensive case that went beyond just the immediate incident. He was documenting the broader impact on John's life and career, including the emotional trauma, professional disruption, and damage to his reputation within the legal community. The case was also attracting attention from legal scholars and civil rights experts who saw it as an opportunity to establish important precedents about racial profiling and police accountability. Law schools were already incorporating the incident into their curriculum as an example of how implicit bias can lead to constitutional violations. As the investigation continued, more witnesses came forward with information about the police department's culture and training practices. Several current and former officers provided statements describing a pattern of racial bias that went far beyond Walker's individual actions. These revelations suggested that the problem was much larger than one rookie officer making a mistake. There appeared to be systemic issues within the department that had allowed and perhaps even encouraged the kind of behavior Walker had displayed. The building management company was also facing serious legal exposure for their role in the incident. Their security guards' actions and the company's inadequate training procedures had directly contributed to John being detained and humiliated. Property management experts noted that the case would likely lead to industry-wide changes in how security companies train their employees and handle tenant interactions. The potential liability for making false reports to police was becoming a significant concern for building owners and security firms. John was also receiving support from unexpected sources. Federal judges who had worked with him sent personal messages expressing their outrage about the incident. Prosecutors from other jurisdictions reached out to offer assistance and solidarity. Even some defense attorneys, who regularly opposed John in court, publicly condemned what had happened to him. This professional support was important for John's emotional recovery, but it also sent a powerful message about the legal community's view of the incident. When prosecutors and defense attorneys could agree that something was fundamentally wrong, it carried significant weight with the public and media. The story continued to generate national attention as more details emerged about the investigation and the broader implications of the case. What would happen next would determine not just John's future, but potentially the future of police accountability and reform efforts across the country. The Department of Justice's investigation was moving faster than anyone expected. Federal prosecutors had reviewed all the evidence within 72 hours and reached a conclusion that would send shockwaves through law enforcement communities nationwide. They determined that Officer Walker had violated John's civil rights under federal statute, and they were prepared to pursue criminal charges. This decision was unprecedented in many ways. Federal prosecutors rarely moved this quickly on civil rights cases, and they typically reserved criminal charges for the most egregious examples of police misconduct. But John's case presented such clear evidence of racial profiling and constitutional violations that prosecutors felt they had no choice but to act decisively. The criminal charges against Walker included deprivation of rights under color of law, a federal felony that carried potential prison time. Legal experts noted that, if convicted, Walker would not only lose his law enforcement career, but could face up to 10 years in federal prison. Walker's defense attorney immediately began negotiating for a plea agreement, understanding that taking this case to trial would be suicide given the overwhelming evidence. The rookie officer's life was effectively over as he had known it, and now the only question was how severe the consequences would be. The police department's response became increasingly frantic as they realized the federal government was treating this as a serious criminal matter rather than an internal disciplinary issue. Department leadership held emergency meetings to discuss damage control strategies and began quietly reaching out to other officers who might have witnessed similar behavior from Walker. The case ultimately resulted in Officer Walker pleading guilty to federal civil rights violations and receiving 18 months in prison. John received a $7 million settlement from the city and used his experience to advocate for police reform nationwide. The incident sparked changes in training protocols at police academies across the country and led to new oversight measures for rookie officers. Most importantly, it proved that when people stand up to injustice with evidence and determination, real change is possible. This case was brutal, but this case on the right-hand side is even more insane.
Uncovering the truth is more important now than ever. Our goal is to hold power to account by letting the evidence speak for itself. The records don't lie. Thanks for watching and being part of this journey.